to see you.
Yeah.
We're going to see the art show.
Oh yeah,
Me too. I'm looking forward to that.
should be fun.
Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome to the library. I'm Ann Kniggendorf. I'm a writer and editor in the Public Affairs Department of the library, and we're so glad to see you here tonight. Before I introduce tonight's program, I'd like to mention the very busy week we have coming up here. We've got events on Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, so hold on to your hat here and I'll tell you what they are. On Sunday at 2, it's Central, we have a history program called Battle for the River Key, Mob, Wars, and Urban Renewal with the author Gary Jenkins. Next Tuesday, the 11th, is the final installment of the Turning Point series with the Command and General Staff College, and it's about Sputnik. So it's called Sputnik and the Race to Control Space. So that'll be back here at 6 o'clock. On Wednesday is the kickoff to Art in the Loop. There will be a temporary outdoor art exhibition and performance series in downtown Kansas City and along the streetcar until November, and this is the kickoff for that. It'll be a lot of art and performances, and it's kind of like a big party. It's a reception, so there's not a central thing like this where somebody will be talking. It'll be an opportunity for anyone who comes to meet artists and have a drink with them and a chat. And finally, many of you have already heard that NPR's Ari Shapiro will be here on Thursday as part of the library's 150th anniversary celebration. We're very excited about that. And because so many people are interested, we're doing a staggered ticket release. As usual, there's no charge for that event, but because so many people are interested, we are going to check RSVPs for that one. And the next ticket drop on that will be 10 o'clock on Tuesday next week. So please watch the website for more tickets to be available after that. I don't know exact times for the rest of the tickets. And we'll also be streaming the R.S. Shapiro event. So if you don't get tickets, you can watch at home. Now tonight's program is Chelan David. He's a local writer and a development director for Lead to Read KC, a children's literacy program organization. He set a goal to visit all 50 states with his 2 daughters, Nia and Kylie, before they graduated from high school. He met that goal, and then he wrote a book about it. So we're going to hear all about that tonight. Please welcome Chelan David. All right. Welcome again.
Thank you.
You have your 2 daughters, Nia and Kylie, are here. Remind me which one is older.
Yeah, Nia's my oldest daughter. She just graduated from high school, and then Kylie's my youngest daughter. She's going to be a junior in high school next year.
They're in the front row here. I think we should clap for them, just to make them uncomfortable. Oh, it worked. And they're on break now, right? They're on summer break?
Correct, yeah. They just got out of school a couple weeks ago.
Okay. So years ago, when you still lived in Seattle, I think, you set the goal I just mentioned of traveling to all 50 states with them before the oldest graduated from high school. So I love traveling with my sons, but it would never occur to me to set a goal like that. What made you think of saying, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, so at that point, when we were in Seattle, they'd visited a handful of states, and we ended up moving back to Kansas City when they were really young, about 2 and 4. And we went through, there's a lot of states between Seattle and Kansas, so we went through about 8 states then. And then I just thought it'd be really cool to visit all 50 states by the time they graduated from high school, because there are about 15 states at that point. And they've been traveling since as long as they can remember. We used to take a lot of regional trips just in the Northwest. There's just so many places to visit in the Great Northwest. So they were used to it, and we just kind of started regionally and then eventually expanded to more national travel.
Okay, and you live in Overland Park now, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and so they were about 4 and 6 when you decided, is that right?
Correct, yeah. So they were really young. And when we moved back to Kansas City, we started doing some regional attractions, a couple hours, maybe a 3-day weekend. But our first big trip was when they're 5 and 7, and my sister and her husband were living in New York at the time. So right after Christmas break, we flew to New York. And my mom joined me after a couple days, but it was a great trip. But we went in January, and it was a huge blizzard, so we kind of had to audible a little bit on some of the things that we wanted to do. But just that experience proved to me that no matter what the conditions or the obstacles, we could have fun. And even if it's just me with the kids, we could have some great trips.
Well, this all kind of is the result of having divorced their mom too, right? So that was part of wanting to find time to be with them. So what was it like, just for people watching at home and anybody here who has small kids, what was it like suddenly trying to travel with little kids when you were used to having a co-parent?
Yeah, it was challenging. And I remember, driving in the backseat, they'd be fighting with each other, as young kids tend to do. And, when there's just one person, you're the one that's driving, the one that's getting them to calm down, the one that's navigating, finding restaurants, attractions. So it could be a little bit much, but I think the more we did it, we just got really comfortable with each other. And, I got kind of used to what their needs were, and they kind of knew that sometimes they're going to be in a car with nothing to do for 5 or 6 hours, and they kind of just got used to it. And, we started just bringing books. At first, I really didn't want electronics. I was thinking this would be great if we can travel and there's no electronics and we can just talk the whole time. But after a while, I figured that probably wasn't a good idea, and I allowed electronics. But that helped somewhat too. Okay.
So you mentioned your trip to New York, but also that's not really quite, that was your first big trip.
Yeah.
But I think people who maybe don't have a lot of time or don't have money for a big trip, or they're just too scared, maybe, where would you tell them to go, maybe a couple hours away from here? Do you have suggestions?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places to go within a few hour radius. One of the places I'd really recommend is Northwest Arkansas, and Bentonville's only about 3 hours away. There's Crystal Bridges Museum. Fayetteville is really close by where the University of Arkansas is. Eureka Springs is a really fun town that has a lot of artists that's nearby too. So, and then just the scenery there is gorgeous. So it's a quick drive. The scenery is gorgeous. There's a lot of attractions. So that's something I definitely recommend. And that's one of the places we went to right when we moved back to Kansas City. Wamego is another fun place. It's only about 2 hours away.
Is that the one with the fireworks?
Yeah, and that's why we went the first time, because they have one of the biggest fireworks shows in the state. And so we went there for the fireworks show, and it's fun. There's a lot of attractions that weekend. And then there's also the Wizard of Oz Museum, which is pretty nice. So we spent several hours there too. But it's a fun, easy drive that you could even do it in one day, but it'd be really easy to do an overnight trip. And if you're looking for just a kind of a day trip, Topeka's probably doesn't pique people's interest too much, but.
Oh, I love Topeka.
Do you? Okay, well, there you go. I don't want to talk about Topeka, but there's a state capitol, obviously, but there's also the Evel Knievel Museum. And,
and I've read that's moving.
Yeah,
in
it is.
November, right?
It is going to be moving. So yeah, if you want to go, you want to go in the next few months before it moves. But I wasn't expecting a whole lot, but it is a really nice museum with tons of exhibits. And we ended up spending like 3 or 4 hours there. And
is it big?
Fairly big, yeah.
What did you like about it?
I've always been kind of fascinated with Evel Knievel. And one of the exhibits said that he's broken 433 bones in his body. And for reference, there's only 206 bones in the human body, so on average.
Something doesn't seem right.
Yeah, exactly. He kept getting back on his motorcycle and doing it again, but on average, he broke every bone twice. And just kind of the bravado he had, the showmanship, I always found him fascinating. And my kids weren't real familiar with him, but they found it interesting. And then there's also, there's some interactive activities that actually taught them about science as well, so it's kind of a sneaky way to.
Like physics activities where they can like catapult up on things?
Exactly, yeah.
Really? So there's like a physical thing they can do
Well,
there?
there's like a motorcycle.
a demo at the Evel Knievel Museum, an interactive, that makes me nervous.
Yeah, but well, it was kind of like a motorcycle video game type thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so
so
nobody's like jumping over flames or anything like that.
Yeah,
okay.
simulated,
All
I
right.
guess. But it's kind of a sneaky way to teach your kids about science too, while they're having fun.
Okay. Your book has some components of a travel guide, and I think you told me that you originally started it that way. Will you tell us how you organize the information in it? Because I imagine a lot of people will be pretty interested in getting it, but since there is that travel guide part, like you started out kind of like with a region and then state and then Will you talk about how you organized it?
Yeah, so, and you're correct. It started off as a travel guide, and I was just going to say, these are the places to visit, and this is how much it costs, and the hours and everything. But I just didn't really like the way it flowed, and I was kind of getting bored reading it. So I decided to incorporate more personal experiences, and some of it is from my childhood. And it kind of starts with kind of an introduction about how I became interested in travel, and then there's transitional chapters, so it talks about the kids growing up and kind of the things we did over the course of the year, and then there'd be a chapter about the trip that we took, and usually when we traveled, we usually went to like 4 or 5 states at a time. So I think it's pretty easy to read. It's like day 1, then day 2, day 3 throughout the entire trip, so it really breaks it out. And originally, when we started traveling, I wasn't going to write a book about it. It was just a way for me to spend time with my kids. So we didn't have like a specific itinerary. We're going to do these states first and then start traveling to other states. It's just, we'd pick a state. Oftentimes the kids would pick it, or a group of states, and we do that. And then we'd kind of look at the map and say, well, here's another 4 or 5 state cluster that we can do. And it was like that till towards the end. And then when we were about 45 states, we had to do one-off states because we had already done most of the states. So that's kind of how I the format of the book, though.
Well, so it's interesting that you say you didn't really have an itinerary because you're hitting all of these landmarks and museums and these big important things, which I kind of forget to go to. Like when I'm traveling with my family, I don't often think, oh, here's this monument, we better make sure we go. But you seem to be doing that. So how did you decide which places to go?
Yeah, and usually when we mapped out a trip, I'd pick a few highlights, like must-do type things, like if we're going to Arizona, the Grand Canyon, and I wanted to go spring training in Surprise, Arizona. But other than that, we drive and then stop by places. We'd kind of scout out attractions for the next day. And so it wasn't real rigid, which I think was good for young kids. It's just, we'd stop when they got tired sometimes and do something that was unexpected. And as they got older too, they had interest, places that they wanted to visit, or they'd be on their phones as we were driving and say, hey, Dad, there's a place a couple hours away. Can we go in that direction? So we had a few attractions lined up, but for the most part, we just ad-libbed as we went.
Okay, so when you ad-lib on a vacation like that, I think that kind of builds in room for being kind of surprised, right? So were there, off the top of your head, can you think of some unusual places or some places where you just were amazed, like, well, I have no idea? Are there a few places like that you can tell about?
Definitely. And that was some of the favorite parts of our trip, are the unexpected visits. I think one is in Wisconsin. And this was one of our last trips, but it was in Door County, I believe, which is right by Lake Michigan. And we were just driving to a state park, and we saw a small county park, sign for the road, and we were just ready for a break. And none of us were expecting anything, and it turned out to be the best park, probably one of the best parks that we visited in all 50 states. It's just so gorgeous. And
what was it called? Do you remember?
I don't remember what it's called, but it's in the book under the Wisconsin section, and it's a state park. I think it might be Sturgeon County, but the waters look like it is in the Mediterranean. It's just so clear. And it's a fairly small park, but most people didn't know about it because unless you're a local, there's no way you'd find out about it. But that was a really pleasant surprise. I think some of you might be familiar with Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo, Texas, which is, all right, we have a fan there.
Is that the one where the Cadillacs are all like on their ends?
Exactly, kind of buried into the ground. And that's another place we weren't expecting. We weren't planning on stopping by, but it's just on the way, and we did a slight detour. And it's really cool because, once again, we were just going to pop out and take a few pictures, but as we walked towards the cars, there's a family that was leaving, and they gave my kids like 4 paint bottles, spray paint bottles.
Oh, so that's interactive too.
Yeah, and so they were able to actually paint the Cadillacs, and that was a pretty memorable experience as well. And that was like right at sunset, so just kind of a special moment that we'll remember forever, I think.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking about unexpected things like that too. And the first time I took my boys to Florida, we did Disney and Universal and all that, but we also went to the beach. And so when we got home, we spent so much money. And so I said, what was your favorite part? What did you like? And of course it was the beach, because that's
Yeah.
really predictable. And I didn't realize that at the time, but now I know. So we do skip all the expensive stuff and just do the beach part. But you had the thing with the ice flows. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, and that was actually my oldest daughter's Nia's idea. We just visited New York, and this was our first trip where we flew into Boston and then drove through 6 states in 7 days. And we're kind of talking about where we wanted to go for the next trip, and Allie was suggested San Diego or Maine, I think, because she wanted to go to the tips of the country. And then Nia was watching the news, and she saw a coverage about the ice flows, which is a once-in-a-generational thing. And I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. We can go to Boston and then actually do Maine as well.
So the ice flows were in Maine or in Massachusetts?
They were in Massachusetts, yeah.
Okay.
Right, Cape Cod. So it's pretty amazing because it's beach area. And then you have these, they're called ice flows, but they look like giant icebergs that just washed onto the shore. And that happens, it doesn't happen very often. So it is really cool that we had seen that story on the news, and we decided to actually do that. And we did over spring break, which was, I think, early March. And it was so cold that spring break trip. So Cape Cod, you think of it as summer and sun and being on the beach, but it was, there's ice flows and ice, and we had our winter coats on, and that whole trip was freezing. But
and were all the ice cream places closed?
Yeah, most of the ice cream places were closed. There's a lot of restaurants were closed too, actually, because they get summer tourists.
Yeah. But that ended up being one of their favorite things on that trip, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And that was actually our favorite trip for about 10 years. I think part of it was our first trip where we drove to a lot of different places. And also we just did so much on that trip. We went to Fenway Park in Boston and visited the Boston Tea Party Museum, did the ice flows, went to Newport in Rhode Island where there's a lot of mansions, went to Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream Factory in Vermont, which is where they're headquartered at. We went to the Von Trapp family lodge, which is in, I'm blanking on the name, but it's in Vermont as well. And
Was that where Sound of Music
Yeah.
was filmed?
No,
Or
but it's
were they? I guess it wouldn't have been
inspired.
filmed. Okay.
Yeah, inspired. The Von Trapp family inspired Sound of Music, so we went to that lodge where the family lived, and we actually ran into one of the Von Trapp relatives. He's a proprietor
Wow.
there now.
That's cool.
So that was fun too. And then we went to Maine and Connecticut, so we just did so much in that 7 days.
And did it end up being that after each trip, their favorite things were the unpredictable, kind of less expensive things?
Yeah.
Did that keep happening?
It did,
Okay.
not all the time, but
Yeah.
it definitely did some of the times. And some of the times, the places we planned on going, for instance, we went to Atlanta. They were really excited about the Coca-Cola Museum and trying all the different sodas. There must be hundreds of different sodas. And that was something they were really looking forward to, and that kind of exceeded their expectations.
And you were able to talk about New Coke.
Yeah. And I'd kind of forgotten about, people around my age probably remember the New Coke fiasco. And, it's one of the marketing, if you take advertising marketing, it's kind of considered one of the worst marketing decisions. But I kind of, I hadn't thought about it for 30 years or so. And there's an exhibit about how big a deal that was. And the company got flooded with complaints. Back then there wasn't email, but a lot of letters and phone calls, and so they ended up switching it back. And I just can't believe that there's people are that upset about the new recipe for Coke. So that was kind of funny too.
Yeah, that is kind of funny. Were there places that you wanted to visit and you couldn't for some reason, and that were disappointments?
Yeah, there were a few of those. I think this is the one that sticks out in my mind because this is probably the most disappointing of all our trips. Before we went to we were going to North Dakota, and there's not a whole lot to do in North Dakota, so we were planning on going to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which is really nice. But in addition to that, we had a week, so we wanted to visit some other places. And we're doing some research online, and we found a lake in Montana called Medicine Lake, and it just looked gorgeous, glaciers and smooth water and mountains. And so it was a long drive from, I think we were coming from Mount Rushmore. It was like an 8-hour drive. And we got there, and I saw a sign that said Medicine Lake, and it looked just like a lake you'd see in Kansas, basically. It's like, that doesn't look like the pictures. And then I looked, I Googled it, and it turns out there's a 1 Medicine Lake and a 2 Medicine Lake. And the 2 Medicine Lake was 5 hours further east. And we'd been in a car drive and through nothing for 8 hours. And we had other plans, so we had to drive back, and we're also looking forward to that and frolicking in those clear waters. And it took us almost all day to make that trip. And usually during the trips, one day we take to drive there and then one day back, but in between we always do activities constantly. And so this was one day we really weren't able to do much. We ended up finding a state park in Montana, which was actually pretty cool, but that was definitely one I remember. And then when we were in California, it was right around when the onset of the pandemic. And so we wanted to go to Lake Tahoe, but for obvious reasons, we weren't able to do all the places that we wanted to, so we had to cut our trip short. And then personally, I don't think my kids were as disappointed, but in Springfield, Massachusetts, there's the Naismith College Basketball Hall of Fame, or the Naismith Hall of Fame, and I really wanted to go there. I'm a huge basketball fan, but the day we went, I think it's a Monday, they're closed on Mondays, so we weren't able to visit that attraction.
That's what keeps happening with me and the Evel Knievel Museum.
Oh, are they closed a certain day? Yeah, yeah. And that happened a couple of times where, like on a Monday or Tuesday, a place was closed, so we just weren't able to visit those attractions.
Well, you did a lot that was sports-centric, right? Was that your idea, or do the girls really like sports also?
Yeah, it's mainly an idea. They kind of played along with it. And they did play sports in high school. Mia played basketball for a number of years, and Callie played basketball and has done track and cheerleading. But for the most part, I kind of led those initiatives, and I think some of them they enjoyed. Like I know Fenway Park was fun for everyone. And
well, what did you see that was really amazing sports-wise? Because you actually went to games too, right?
Yeah, we went to a few games. For spring training, we're in Surprise, Arizona. And that's something I've always wanted to do. So we were able to watch the Royals play the Cubs, which was really fun.
What year was that? Was that a year when we had really good players?
It was right after. We had really good players, a couple of years after.
Close
after
enough?
That. Yeah,
okay.
they still had a few of the good players, but not the World Series years. For me, a highlight was Lambeau Field in Green Bay too, famous stadium. And Green Bay, I had no idea how small that city was going to be. It's about the size of Topeka, so there's not much there. It's really the Green Bay Packers. And they have a really nice museum with just tons of artifacts and videos and everything, so I enjoyed that. Another one we went to, which is kind of sports related, but it's more, I'd almost call it civil rights. It's a Muhammad Ali museum in Louisville. And I've always been a big fan of Muhammad Ali, but didn't, I knew about his boxing career, but I didn't know about some of all the things that he went through in his life. And so I think that was one we all enjoyed too. And then in Louisville, the Louisville Slugger Museum is really fun. And you can do batting practice. So, they pitch at different speeds. So Kylie, she was like 10 years old, and she actually did the best out of all three of us. But that was a fun one too.
Okay. And you played basketball in high school, is that right?
Correct, yeah. I played that's kind of my first love is basketball. And I played through high school. I could have played at small college, but I still follow college basketball really closely, and the NBA some too. So yeah, we went to NBA game, the Denver Nuggets. And this was actually, now they're really good, and they just won a championship. But when we went, they weren't very good. So we kind of missed the good teams, it seems like.
It's hard to plan that.
Yeah, you can't plan that. But.
Yeah. And I thought I was remembering something about your father's interest in your basketball career, but when I went back through the book, I couldn't find the spot. But was that something that he really pushed you on, or what was it?
Yeah, he didn't push me, but my mother and father got separated when I was really young, so I didn't get to know my father very well. And he knew I loved basketball, so one of the ways he wanted to try to get close to me is through following basketball. And he grew up in India, so he knew absolutely nothing about basketball, but he started watching games and became a pretty big fan of KU basketball and learned what like the jargon is, like rebounds and assists. And he kind of asked me how many assists I got during different games. And so I was in middle school, so that's back obviously before email, so I'd write letters to him, and most kids in middle school don't want to write long letters, and he'd kind of get on me for not providing more details about the basketball game. So I learned to put more details in and make a language he could relate to as well.
It was smart of him to try to relate to you that way. That was good.
And it's funny because when I went to the University of Kansas, and I was a big basketball fan, and he was convinced that I should be on the basketball team, and obviously I wasn't good enough for that, but he thought I should be a substitute free throw shooter. And I always thought that was really funny because I was a good free throw shooter, but you can't. I didn't think you could substitute and then put a good free throw shooter in and then have them. But I was actually reading a book about Fog Allen, who Allen Fieldhouse is named after, and back in the 1920s, I think it was, he was actually a substitute free throw shooter, and that was back when.
You and Fog Allen.
Yeah, me and Fog Allen, and back then you could. If there's a turnover, the other team would get a free throw. So I think my dad actually probably read about that, which I had no idea. He's way ahead of me in terms of that.
Okay. Well, so a really unexpected and surprising component of your book, which I may say is kind of like the elephant in the pages, is what happened following your parents' separation, which kind of seemed to set things in motion for you with your love of travel. Will you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I had a pretty unusual childhood. When I was about 2 years old, my mother and father were separated. And, we spent most of the time with my mom. We'd see my dad sometimes, on weekends. And he'd start dropping us off at my mom's a little bit later and later when he was supposed to on Sunday evenings. And, my mom didn't think a whole lot about it. But, one of the visits, we didn't come home. And then she received a collect call from my dad. And we're in India, so he'd taken us to another continent. And that was actually, I was too young to remember most of it. My sister remembers more than I do, but I do remember bits and pieces of traveling. And we started in India, and then we went to Canada and Europe.
This lasted 3 years?
Yeah, 3 or 4 years.
This was the mid-70s, kind of?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, early mid-70s. And we really, we're kind of on the run, so we just sleep, wherever we could oftentimes, train stations, on a bus, or rely on the kindness of strangers a lot of times as well. And, we went to a lot of different places. And, my mom was devastated because, her kids weren't worth it anymore. So when my father would call, she started to trace the calls. And she found out kind of the general area we're at, which was in London. And she knew that my dad loved books, and me and my sister did as well. So she knew that he would be visiting libraries. So she called all the libraries within that area and was able to track down a librarian that said that he had a card there. And then, in Kansas, Bob Dole is a senator, so my mom reached out to everybody that she could possibly think of to help and get us back to Kansas.
And Scotland Yard was involved?
Yeah, so Scotland Yard actually got involved, and they tracked us down. And I still remember that moment when they tracked us down. And
that would be pretty memorable.
Yeah,
Scotland
yeah.
Yard comes for you.
Yeah, I remember them knocking on the door, and me and my sister were just, when you're young, you're whoever you're familiar or comfortable with is what you want to stay with. So we're used to being with my dad. I remember it's hard to be torn away from my dad, and then we were in a kind of a foster home, I guess you could say, for a while while they figured out the court case, and that went on for a while. And then, we warmed back up to my mom, and eventually she won custody, and we came back to Kansas when I was in kindergarten, and my sister would have been in 4th grade, I think. But that was kind of the genesis of where the travel started, I guess you could say, because those are my earliest memories. And, me and my ex-wife got divorced in around 2011. And, I could kind of see, I didn't really understand my father, a lot of his actions at the time, or even when I was growing up. But, when I was divorced and we went through the custody battle, I could see, why he did some of the things that he did, because as a parent, that's the most important thing in your life is you want to spend time with your kids, and when you don't have that opportunity, you might do some things that normally wouldn't be done. So, obviously I wasn't going to take the kids out of the country, but, I fought in the custody battle really hard.
And you did talk to your ex-wife,
yeah.
too, so it wasn't like you went off to New York to visit your sister.
No.
So you talked to her. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
And like a lot of marriages, at the very beginning it's pretty acrimonious, or divorces, I mean. But, after a while, we have a really good relationship now. We live about a mile apart and are constantly dropping the kids off back and forth. And I think it's good. That's one of the things we talked about. Like, it's really important that we, have a civil relationship, because I do have a lot of friends that they've been divorced and they can't be in the same room, or if they're at graduations or sporting events, they're as far away from each other as they can possibly be, and I didn't want my kids to have to go through that. But yeah, she's been really supportive and understanding of my desire to spend time with the kids and to build that bond through travel.
Well, so do you feel like you, through that experience with your father, did that make you feel like you understood better than maybe some people do about how traveling bonds people?
Yeah, I definitely think so. That played a big role, I think, in the travel, is because those are my earliest memories, and I still remember some moments with my dad and like cooking together, and he loved to teach us. So I remember him teaching us math, and he loved to walk. So I remember walking and going to libraries and being in train stations, and even when the kids were like, when we started traveling, it was about 5 and 7. I knew they'd remember bits and pieces. I knew they wouldn't remember everything, but I think that desire to just spend time with them, because when you work and you get home, especially when they're young, you get home, I'd pick them up from daycare about 6 o'clock, and by the time I fed them and read to them, it's time for them to go to bed. So you really don't have time to get to know each other real well. I mean, you do the day-to-day stuff, but by going on weekend trips or regional trips, we all kind of share a sense of adventure, and you have conversations and dialogue that you would never have if you're sitting at home or even in the neighborhood, because you see things, questions are asked because something you're not familiar with.
Yeah, that was a really nice part of the book where, going back to the structure of it, you did have day 1, day 2, went to the Coke Museum, did this, but you also did include conversations that you had, and it was almost like the talking points were sort of built in to. Was it planned that you did that? I mean, or did you just, once you were there, you were just really good at picking out the things that they would be interested in talking about when they were little, or how did that work? Because I can picture people going to museums and then they're just walking around for a minute and looking at pictures, and the kids don't want to read the signs, and then they're out of there.
Yeah,
That's what I did.
And I did try to make it more meaningful than that, and I did, especially when they're young. I'd choose museums that I thought they'd be interested in, or there could be a lesson learned. And there's the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis was definitely one. The one I remember though, we were in Savannah, Georgia, and we went to is a founder of Girl Scouts. Her name's Juliet Gordon Lowe, and is that where she grew up, kind of the house that she grew up in. The whole museum was dedicated to her. And this was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember afterwards, we're just sitting in the courtyard, and Kylie, my youngest daughter, said, "Dad, that's the first museum that we've ever gone to that's dedicated to a woman." And I hadn't thought about that before.
Oh, that's really interesting that
yeah.
she noticed that. And was she in Scouts?
She had been a few years ago. She wasn't in at that time.
Sort of related, but sort of didn't. But
Yeah.
okay, but that's a really great observation.
Yeah, and it's just, perspective of a 10-year-old girl is different than, 45-year-old father. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, they're the only other ones, we put our heads together, and Nia has a really good memory. The only other ones we could think of are the Amelia Earhart Museum, which is right down the road in Atchison, and there's one in Denver dedicated to Molly Brown, who was a Titanic survivor. But other than that, there aren't very many, and that kind of struck a chord with me. And as we move forward, I tried to integrate things like that. But yeah, we did have some really interesting conversations, and some of them weren't deep. But when we went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, just led to a conversation about music and who my favorite artists were and who theirs were.
Yes, that's really a getting to know you thing that maybe, you could kind of have those conversations in the car just listening to music, but different when you see an exhibition that's just about that, right?
Yeah.
So were you surprised? What did you get to know about them? You don't have to tell us. I don't want to reveal any of your secrets
I want
here.
to reveal any dirty secrets, but
There was a part about was it Britney Spears?
Yeah, that's
What was that? There was a song you liked, and they were like, eh.
Yeah, and this is when we're going through Louisiana, and usually when I had we had a rental car, and I'd always request a CD player because I'm old school and I like to have my CDs and know exactly what I'm playing. And
Oh, so you travel with a stack?
yeah,
You still do that?
not as much anymore, just because there's no CD players. But
Okay.
and my kids would always make fun of me, and they're like, "Dad, you can just do a playlist." But I'd be like, "Well, coverage comes in and out, and I don't have to fiddle with it." But on the trip to Louisiana, I didn't have a CD player, so we listened to just the, whoever was on the top 40 stations, and I really did get to know a lot about my kids' interests, and it's funny because I wasn't into any of that music. It was like Post Malone and Lizzo and Selena Gomez, the Jonas Brothers, and stuff that I just don't listen to. But when you listen to songs over and over again, that repetition, you kind of start liking those songs. So I used to always tell them, music was way better in my day in the 80s and 90s. And they're like, "Dad, no, it's much better now." And they kind of sold me on that trip.
And you're like, wow, the Jonas Brothers, actually, they're
yeah,
pretty good.
And it's funny you mentioned,
happen?
yeah. And you mentioned Britney Spears. I'd gotten a CD for Kylie actually when she was younger. It's the greatest hits, and it's kind of in my stack to wake me up if I needed some pick me up music. And I think it's "Baby One More Time" was a song I play to kind of wake me up. And the kids used to like it when they're younger, but then when I put it in as we're driving, they're like, "Dad, what are you listening to?" But for me, it's just a way. Yeah, it's kind of a guilty pleasure for me. But also, I'd crank it up, and when I was trying to stay awake, usually I was for the first 48 states, I was the lone driver.
48 states.
Yeah.
Only
and then,
guy driving.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I needed anything to wake me up, and I'd roll down the windows and crank up music. And then my fiance Isabel is here too. She went on the last 2 trips. To Hawaii and Alaska, and she helped out with the driving.
You went on the big good ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's why she's kind of held out until the marquee trips, I guess you could say.
Okay. And then I've also heard that in North Dakota, if you save that for your last one, they have this little kind of party for you.
Oh,
like you
really?
get a certificate or something. But that didn't happen for you. Have you
Yeah.
ever heard of that?
No, I didn't realize that, but North Dakota actually was one of our last states. I think it was our 47th, maybe. And that was one of the ones we had to do one-offs. We drove all the way to North Dakota just for North Dakota. But our last 2 were Alaska and then Hawaii. But we capped it off with Hawaii.
Okay, so not North Dakota. Don't want to cap it
Oh,
with that.
it-
Because
no.
they were like actually bribing people to
Oh,
make
really?
that their 50th
Yeah, I
state.
could kind of see that, to drive people there.
Yeah.
And people ask me, like, what are the states that you probably wouldn't go to again? And North Dakota is one of them.
Well, that's sad.
Yeah, and Theodore Roosevelt National Park, I would recommend that. It's really nice, and there's a lot of wildlife. But other than that, the rest of the state, there's just not much there, and the drive there's pretty barren as well.
Okay, so going back to your big conversations, because to me that was the best part about the book, was that the kidnapping was the most intriguing part. I'm just going to be honest about that. But the best part for me as a parent was just seeing how you got to know them, and it was hard not to feel a little bit jealous. But will you tell about your 2020 trip to Minnesota?
Yeah.
Because that seemed like a really big one when they were old enough to really talk to you.
Yeah. And that's the thing. As they got older, our conversations definitely got much deeper. But yeah, in the summer of 2020, it was like kind of the pandemic and also the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. We went to Minneapolis, and it was a couple months after George Floyd was killed, but there's still a lot of people gathering at that spot. And I wanted to take my kids there because it's a historic moment, kind of almost a sacred spot it seemed like. And we went there, and one of the things, it was just so peaceful. It wasn't a protest or anything, it was just people gathering there to pay their respects and to talk to other travelers or people that were there at that time. And I just remember people being so friendly and offering us water, and people when we parked, I saw license plates from all over the country. But afterwards, we kind of started talking about, some of the things that we experienced as we saw the people gathered there. And my kids asked me if I'd ever experienced racism. And, I said I had. I think all people of color at some point have experienced some form of racism. But yeah, they asked me about, what I'd experienced specifically. And for me, a lot of it was, I had, growing up, I had a lot of black friends, and I had white friends as well. But when I was with my black friends, we were just treated differently. And I remember when we went to go shopping, the clerk would follow us around, and when I was with white friends, it's just, how are you doing? Can we help you? And the same when I was like I remember when I was driving at 16, had like 4 or 5 black friends. I stopped for no reason. When I was with white friends, I could be swerving over, speeding. I mean, no one ever stopped me. So I was telling them about that. And then I asked them, what they've experienced. And they said they haven't experienced a whole lot of overt racism, but the curriculum, like for example, you learn a little bit about Black history, but you don't learn about Black Wall Street in Tulsa. You don't learn about, I think it's Crispus Attucks, a Revolutionary War hero. And then with Native Americans, they really gloss over the part about how kids from Native American Indian families were pulled from their homes and forced to go to American schools and basically be assimilated. So we had a really deep conversation about that, and it's something that, once again, wouldn't have happened because we'd watched coverage of the news and all the protests that were going on around the country.
So just sitting at home, you didn't talk about those
Yeah,
things?
we did, like just a little bit, but not nearly that deep. And we even went to the plaza when they're having, they're at, not Loose Park, but the park that's right next to the plaza where people were kind of gathered and protesting. We went to that. We talked about it a little bit, but being on the road, we just had a much deeper conversation.
That's really great. And so do those conversations kind of continue now, or is it you're back in home mode, so you're not having that as much?
I think because we do kind of relive some of our memories sometimes, or if we're watching TV, or sometimes when we're just running errands, maybe we'll see a T-shirt of a place that we'd visited, and that kind of brings back the conversations, and we'll talk about that, the moment or the trip that we did at that point. And also, even like movies or TV shows, a lot of times there's references to some of the places we've seen.
Oh, well, that would be really nice.
Yeah.
As a young person too, to be able to see, oh my gosh, look at that.
And that actually happens quite a bit, like places that none of us had been to before, but then now, it's kind of part of our shared history together.
Really good, yeah. Okay, so what is the next thing you're going to do?
Yeah, so we wrapped up our 50 state tour about a year and a half ago, and I'd pledged my daughters I'd take them all 50 states by the time they graduated, so we were about a year and a half ahead of schedule, which was nice. But one of the things Kylie wants to do is to go to the U.S. territories, so we're thinking about going to Puerto Rico. Another place I really want to go to is Toronto. I've heard great things about that, and probably maybe go to Montreal and some places in that area, Niagara Falls while we're there. And then there's some places that we traveled to that we weren't able to spend a whole lot of time in. So we'll probably revisit some places. In fact, over 4th of July weekend, we're going to go back to Minneapolis and visit some lakes in that area. But those are kind of...
Careful you don't arrive on the 4th of July or a Monday, because then everything will be closed.
Yeah, exactly. Which
and you'll just
I
be
should
sad
learn
again.
that by now, yeah.
Yeah.
And eventually we'd like to do some international travel too, but that's probably a little ways down the road.
All right. Well, this is all really enviable and really fun to hear about. And we've got people watching at home, so I think we'll have some questions probably coming in from YouTube. But if anybody here has a question, please come on up to the microphones and ask. Make sure whatever you say ends in a question mark. And then that way people at home can hear what you're saying, and so can everybody else here. Does anybody have anything?
Yeah, come on.
I think I've got one from home too. So, but you go ahead, ma'am. Ask yours first.
I wondered if when you went traveling, did you stay in motels or did you camp out?
Yeah, I love it. We loved outdoors, but we're not much into camping out and dealing with the elements. So for the most part, it was hotels, and I hardly ever booked anything in advance because I didn't know where we were going to be. So we just find a hotel kind of by the side of the road. The last few years, we've done more Airbnbs, especially if we're going to be there for a couple of days, which is nice. And we did that in Hawaii and Alaska. And it's nice because you have more space and you can cook. So it's a little bit of a combination, but mostly hotels. Yeah, great question.
How did you like Alaska? What did you
I
like
loved
about
it, yeah. And that was actually my favorite state of all the states we visited. And the reason I liked it is just the scenery is so gorgeous. I tell people it's kind of like Colorado, but on steroids. There's mountains everywhere, water, it's clear water. We went in early September, so the weather was perfect. There's great great national parks. One thing I didn't realize about Alaska is how vast it was. So originally I was thinking, we'd fly into Juneau and then drive to Anchorage. But then when I started doing research, I discovered that it's like a 17-hour drive from Juneau to Anchorage. So we just flew into Anchorage, and we were only able to see a small percentage of Alaska, but what we did see was so pretty. And we saw a lot of wildlife too, which was fun.
What about Hawaii? What did you like the most about that?
Yeah, Hawaii was probably our most relaxed trip. Usually we woke up really early and we're on the road most of the time. Hawaii, we were in Honolulu and we were at Airbnb, so we had a base the entire trip. And we slept in a little bit longer, and primarily we went to a lot of beaches and just relaxed. We went to Pearl Harbor as well, which was a highlight for me because I've always wanted to go there. And we did a few other things, but for the most part, we went to a lot of beaches. Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah.
When you traveled to Utah, which of the national parks there that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, we went to a couple of great ones. Arches was the first one we went to, and the kids loved it because there's a lot of different rock formations that kids anybody can climb on, which was really nice. And I'm trying to think of the other one that we went to in Utah. Do you guys remember? Zion, yeah, and Zion is kind of on the other edge of Utah, but that's a really pretty park too. And that was when we talked about our favorite national parks, Zion was one of our top choices, but I liked Arches a lot too. But there's some other national parks that we didn't have a chance to go to, so Utah is a really fun place to visit.
And one additional question.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to communicate with the hoodoos when you went to like Bryce or around Utah? They are very famous for their hoodoos, like Thor Hammer or something like that at Bryce Canyon. And people go there and sometimes they have like a religious type spiritual involvement there. I'm just wondering if that happened.
No, I think I do remember hearing about that, but yeah, we didn't do that one. But yeah, next time that would be a fun.
All right, thank you.
Fun to try. Yeah, thanks.
I'm assuming that you kept travel journals, and did you, a bunch of them, it sounds like.
Yeah.
How about the girls? Did they also keep travel journals, and did you reference those in writing the book?
A little bit, yeah. Kylie does a lot of diary, so she kept some notes, and then Nia has incredible memory. But it's funny, when we first started traveling, I wasn't planning on writing a book, so I didn't take real detailed notes. And I had to go back and look at my social media and kind of remember the order that we went and everything. But then between the three of us, we could kind of piece everything together. But as we progressed, and I knew I was writing a book, which was the last 30 states or so, I did take pretty detailed notes just as we went through the different destinations. So I'd remember as much as I could. And then I'd always take those pamphlets that they hand out and brochures just so I could remember some details. But I did, after every trip, I'd kind of sit with the kids and talk about the highlights and things that definitely need to be included. And then after I wrote the chapter, I'd run it by them and make sure that I got everything that was relevant. And if there's any, usually they never told me to add stuff. They'd always take me to take out stuff, but that's pretty consistent.
I was wondering what the significance of the title is.
Yeah.
The Beautiful States of Mind.
Yeah.
Sounds like more of a journey of the mind than a physical journey.
Yeah, and a big part of the trip was kind of healing for me after going through the divorce. So my original title was going to be From 0 to 50, kind of like as you do in a car, but there's another title that's very similar to that. So, but yeah, I did Beautiful States of Mind because for me it was more than just travel. It was a way to kind of heal, and I think that the title really represents what our journey was. Is a beautiful states of mind. We just enjoyed every single state that we went to, or some attraction at every single state, and that's kind of where the title came from, though.
Got one from somebody watching at home. This person writes, having seen all 50 states, what would you say to encourage people to visit Kansas and the Midwest, aka flyover country?
Yeah. I do think the Midwest is underrated. And when I lived in Seattle, I was really spoiled because you had Portland, a couple hours to the south, and Vancouver to the north, and national parks and the ocean. But so when I first came back to Kansas, it took me a little bit to get used to it because if you go 2 or 3 hours any direction. There's not a whole lot, but you just have to kind of look for things. And Kansas, like I mentioned, there's Wamego. There's close by. There's Northwest Arkansas, Missouri. We went to Hahatonka, which is a kind of right by the Ozarks, and so the Ozarks in Missouri. So I think there are a lot of pretty places in Missouri and Kansas. Sometimes you have to drive a little bit further to reach those. And then certainly in Missouri, you have St. Louis, which there's a lot of attractions. But yeah, I really enjoyed Arkansas. And then we did some things in Iowa. We went to Pella, Iowa, which is a fun place that probably not a lot of people have heard of, but it's got a lot of kid-friendly attractions. But yeah, there are a lot of places within 4 or 5 hour drive. South Dakota is another place. You can get to Sioux Falls in about 5 hours, which is a nice place. And then if you go another 5 hours, you can go Mount Rushmore if you want to do a 3-day weekend or so. But yeah, there is a lot to do in the Midwest for sure.
Okay, so Chelan has copies of his book for sale in the lobby, and we'll do a signing. Does anybody else have a question? I'm going to close it up if you don't. Okay, well, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. All right. Well,